Coaches. Blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, they can't hold a flame against you, ay. Blow the whistle, blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, got the game, it ain't no issue, yeah. Blowing the whistle, I had enough with you, the championship, it is gone. Ain't listen to you, I can't give it to you, cause you don't know what I've been on. This is the Coaches Podcast.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back once again for the second time today to the Fantasy Coaches Podcast. I am your host, Coach Steve. Of course, my other two companions did not join me for the 7 p.m. show, but maybe they will surprise me, so that's okay. It's two-a-days here on the Fantasy Coaches, and of course, we have a very fun guest on tonight's show, Chae Vernon. Welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm doing so well right now. I'm messaging John on Twitter, telling him he better get his ass on this show to join us tonight, man. I'm ready to rock and roll. I'm ready to talk some fantasy football, and I obviously love your company. We do many shows together, but I don't get to see as much John. I don't get to see Jibs as much, so I like to see those two on here. We'll see what happens. We're gonna have a good show regardless.
That is true. Yes, we are going to. Hopefully, they'll jump in. I did message them, so maybe they will jump in, but. Again, guys, if you're listening to our tonight's show, we are going to be talking about draft strategies. We're going to be talking about different strategies you could take in your drafts and kind of players that you should target or look to target during these strategies. A lot of people talk about, you should take the strategy this because you do this, this, and this. Well, which players would best fit in those strategies? Where direction do you want to go? So that's what we're going to kind of talk about tonight here. We went over the news today, but Chase, let me get your opinion on Alvin Kamara. Obviously, everyone knows he's serving a 3-game suspension. Where are you taking Alvin Kamara? Are you taking Alvin Kamara, and where are you taking him in drafts this year?
Yeah, so we kind of missed the window on Alvin Kamara in terms of we can get a value on him because with only 3 games to serve as a suspension, people are going to be looking to hop on him a lot earlier than what they were. There was a lot of skepticism that he could miss 6 games, potentially 8 games because they caught it on video. That is not the case anymore. He is only missing 3. Now, what's interesting is they brought in Jamal Williams, right? They brought in Kendra Miller. They just brought in somebody recently. Who was the most recent running back they just signed, I think, today?
I think Kareem Hunt went in for a visit.
Oh, that's what it was. Yes, Kareem Hunt went for a visit, which means that they're still looking for veteran presences across there, which I think might have to do a little bit more with Kendra Miller than it does with anything else going on over there. But Eno Benjamin too. Poor Eno, man. It's no longer Eno season. That was my boy. But no, I think Kamara is still value. I think that he's going to get utilized at a high rate. We saw Derek Carr in 2022 produce a 8.9% dump off rate while under pressure. So I think that was 11th highest in the NFL for 2022. We could see right back to those Drew Brees numbers where he was getting 83 receptions every single season, right? It was magic. I loved it. I don't think that the Kamara is going to return to be an RB1, so don't get me wrong about that. But I'm more than happy to take a shot on him as an RB2, RB3 range type player. Just temper your expectations.
No, definitely. And it might be somebody, we kind of mention him in a strategy maybe in a little bit here. But like I said, I'll build on what I had already said earlier today. I don't think RB1 is there for him. If there's a small chance, maybe. There's still a small chance. It's unlikely at this point of his career, but maybe he gets back to being a little bit more efficient, fewer carries. You saw the last few years, his carries went up and his efficiency kind of went down. He didn't see the targets as much. Obviously, there's different factors involved, but possibly maybe getting back to being just a pass-catching back and being a weapon in that sense might get him into a better fantasy graces than he has been the last few seasons here. So, again, I'm still taking him in around 6 if he's there and it's the way my team is built. I think that 3 games is nothing. It's nothing, and he should be good to go by week 4 starting. So that's kind of how I feel on the situation for the Alvin Kamara. But that's it. In terms of news, again, there wasn't anything earlier on today's show, but we have a lot to talk about in this show because this is a really fun episode. I really enjoyed having this episode happen, and I want to Chase on for the show because I do like Chase's opinion on a lot of things here. So let's get right into it. We're going to start with the 0 RB strategy. And if you don't know what the 0 RB strategy is, maybe you're living under a rock or playing fantasy for the first time. It's basically a strategy where you don't take running backs for a certain amount of rounds. Some people say 6, some people say 8. Really depends on your preference on where positions are available. But we're not taking RB in the early round picks here and going late and just taking that backup, that risk in the back end there, taking the guy who gets injured and his backup, or just taking a guy who no one's talking about, like Alvin Kamara a long time ago, and winning fantasy championships in this direction while loading up on like wide receiver, tight end, running back. Chase, do you like this strategy overall? Do you like taking this approach in your fantasy?
So there's a belief out there, right, for the zero RB truthist, where these backup running backs that you can get in the later rounds can provide you with significant upside, and they're not lying. Every single year we see top end running back get hurt for a significant amount of weeks, and then we see his running back come in, fill a void that you can grab off the waiver wire, and they're going to put up relatively similar numbers to anybody that's not elite. Meanwhile, when we talk about some of these elite guys, I mean, Christian McCaffrey, right, has gotten hurt throughout multiple years, where people would draft him as an RB1 and he completely fell off. Jonathan Taylor, last year was drafted as the RB1 in most cases, didn't perform as the RB1. Meanwhile, you have other guys that have constantly done it at the running back position. Todd Gurley. I mean, I could go on and on. The list is literally endless of like the running backs drafted in the first and second round that don't perform at that level. Now, that's not to say that doesn't happen at the wide receiver position, right? Or at the tight end position, or if you're playing in 2 quarterback leagues at the quarterback position. However, Jamar Chase last year got drafted as a top end guy, performed at that level. Sure, Cooper Kupp got hurt, but Jamar Chase was there. AJ Brown did his thing. CeeDee Lamb did his thing. These are all guys that were drafted in the top couple rounds. So we see a lot more consistency from the wide receiver position because of the lack of injuries in comparison from wide receivers to running backs. So while you're talking about betting against somebody that's going to take a wide or running back in the first round by drafting their backup in like the 13th round, now you're set up for a tremendous swing in production, with a safer bet at the wide receiver position. So, with that said, I like the strategy. I'm not completely against it, but it really kind of depends as to like, hey, are you going to stick to the strategy to the nines to make it go through? Because what do you consider zero RB? Are we talking 5th round? Are we talking 6th round?
That's a big thing. Where do you consider it? I think 6. I personally think 6, 7, or 8, depending on where I like somebody, is then when I'll take my first RB. If I want to take this approach, that's somewhere where I'm going to take it. I don't like taking. Some people think 10 later could be a potential way to go. I think that's a little too risky. But I think somewhere in the 7th and 8th range is where I would consider taking my first RB in that sense. How do you figure?
If we're talking 6th round, we're talking maybe Cam Akers falls to you. That'd be great. James Conner, Rashad White, Alexander Madison, J.K. Dobbins. And this is the funny part, right? Like if you've heard about the RBs at dead zone, right? That's typically rounds 3 through round 6 or so is where RBs essentially go to die. I mean, it started with like LaShawn McCoy when he played for the Bills. And it happens every single year. It's like clockwork. But this year, we're seeing running backs go a full round and a half later on average based on where they were last year. And last year, they moved back too. We're seeing the average running back get drafted, like let's say RB10 is getting drafted a round and a half later than what they were last year. RB16 is getting drafted a round and a half later than what they were last year. I think Ian Hart has put an article out about that about halfway through the offseason. I could be wrong, but I'm trying to remember who to credit on that. But essentially, we're seeing a significant fall. So we're saying that the RB dead zone is falling back a round and a half, 2 rounds, right? That means the RB dead zone is now, instead of starting at round 3, is starting at round 5. And so now the RB dead zone could get pushed all the way back, especially if it's kind of spread out throughout there to round 8 or 9. It's like, dude, you're playing with fire essentially here. Way more landmines, I guess. But the good thing is that you're not paying that value. So I could actually see this year more than any. I could see myself working for the zero RB strategy, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it swing next year back to where it was, because I think this is an overcorrection in the eyes of wide receivers over running backs.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely, because we just did a podcast earlier on different rounds, on looking at 2 different rounds of positions, and we agreed that like taking a RB in the third round made more sense to grab a wide receiver in the first round. And you're looking at even later rounds, like you mentioned, a lot of great players that are in round 5 and 6 that I think a lot of them have, there's issues with them. Obviously, they're not maybe as talented as some of the guys that are in the top, but they all have workhorse roles to some extent, 65% of their carry share in their backfield here. And I think a zero RB strategy works a lot in that sense there. Like taking the Cam Akers in round 6, makes a lot of sense here. I mean, even if you want to take Rachaad White, Isaiah Pacheco, Alvin Kamara could fall. That's risky. Obviously, you're missing him for 3 games, but you're taking these guys that have potential to play decent RB2 numbers in those later rounds, and you're not spending high capital on them. I mean, even if you look round 8, 9, what people might consider taking a running back, guys like Brian Robinson, Jamal Williams, guys who maybe not have a lot of upside in terms of that sense, but can give you a decent production. And then you have, the Devon A-Chains, the Zach Charbonnets, the Rashad Pennies, I'm trying to think of someone else here, Kendry Millers, Tank Bigsby, some of these rookies that have upside in their game that you're taking later on in drafts that all could end up being starters at some point during the season here because of maybe an injury or maybe just playing better than what the current starter is showing us. And doing a strategy like zero RB makes sense for that because then you can take these guys in later rounds that have upside that you're not spending big money on. So I do like this strategy. I think this is probably one of my top 3 in terms of strategies for my redraft leagues in any given year. I don't like the injuries at the running back position. We continue to see it year after year out. So
yeah, just know that if you're only playing one league, this is probably not the strategy you should prefer to go with. This is a strategy where you have a portfolio of probably 5-10 different leagues, something along those lines, and you're able to take that luxury because it's a complete lottery shot. You could end up with nothing at running back throughout the whole entire year, and you get completely cock blocked from picking up running backs because maybe your RB or your league hoards them, and all of a sudden you're turning around completely screwed at the position. So this is something that's like, oh, this is a big money league. I'm going to throw all my chips in and try the zero RB strategy. Well, you shouldn't just try it in a big money league for the first time. But essentially, if you want to try to win a big money league that's competitive, this is probably the route to go.
Yeah, and just another note, you have to know the backups. If you're going to do this, you need to have knowledge on who the backup running back is. Someone goes down, who's the guy to pick up? You need to be very active on the waivers. You need to find that running back because that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that waiver wire pickup that's like, oh, this is going to help me get over the edge because I didn't spend a first or second round capital. I spent $30 in Fab to get a guy who's going to give me potential RB1 seat production for the rest of the season, RB2 production for the rest of the season. So you need to know your strategy very well if you're going to do zero RB.
Yeah. And so, for example, good example of this real quick, and we don't have to spend much more time on this, but Kenny Nwangwu is a guy that I actually want to roster in a league where I'm using him as a bye week fill-in, a tertiary option at running back, somebody that can get me points any week because he's more than likely going to be the pass-catching back for the Vikings. Meanwhile, Ty Chandler is going to be that dude who's going to be the handcuff for Alexander Mattison. So if I'm going zero RB strategy, I'm not taking Kenny Nwangwu. I'm taking Ty Chandler in hopes that something happens to Alexander Mattison, I shouldn't say in hopes, but, thinking that something could happen to Alexander Mattison and you're taking the running back that's going to step in for him because he's more than likely going to be the guy who takes the early down work while Kene ends up taking the pass catching role. We still have to see how that shakes out in preseason, but
we'll see. I still love Alexander Mattison. Please don't get hurt. All right. So another form of zero RB has become more popular over the years now. Is obviously hero RB, is where you take one running back early and then basically just go back to zero RB. Don't take another running back late. This is probably my preferred strategy in almost any league that I'm in. It's taking a guy early, taking the Austin Eckler, the CMC early, or taking maybe in round 2 the Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb route, where you take one of these guys in the first 2 rounds. You have an elite running back on your team it's going to put up RB1 numbers for you most weeks. And then going back to that zero RB strategy where you're taking like the Brian Robinsons, the Devon A-Chains, guys who have some potential or guys who have elite upside for your team that you can fill in as an RB2 week in and week out. Chase, how do you feel about the zero RB? I know it's pretty similar to zero RB, but do you like this better than the zero RB?
Yeah, this is actually my go-to. Typically, I'm trying to draft 2 wide receivers early, and then my third round pick typically falls to the running back position. Guys like Brees Hall, guys like Travis Etienne. No, Brees Hall's risky because of the ACL, but I'm still taking shots on him. Travis Etienne is one of my favorite guys in this range. Jamar Gibbs I actually think is more risky than Brees Hall is, but I'd still like to take him in and plug him in there. Ramondre Stevenson's a great one too. If you end up with, the first overall pick, you end up going like Justin Jefferson, Jalen Hurts, and then Ramondre Stevenson, something along those lines. You could put together like an elite level build with players like that. Now, if I'm drafting tail end, I'm taking a look at Bijan Robinson in the first round as a guy that I could pair with maybe like a CeeDee Lamb, for example, according to ADP. Maybe Devonta Adams, who I think is getting completely underrated this year, although I don't think that he sees the volume he saw last year, the big games that he saw. I still think he's getting underrated. AJ Brown, you could pair him with. I mean, there's so many different levels where you could pair Bijan with, another stud wide receiver and still be in a good position. In terms of running backs in the first round outside of Bijan, like if you're going earlier, I'm not taking a shot on Austin Eckler this year. I think the offense is going to be dynamic. I think that they're going to throw to the wide receivers a lot more often. It's going to be a lot more pass heavy, but downfield. We haven't seen Ezekiel Elliott or Tony Pollard get a ton of targets in this Kellen Moore type offense. So I don't want to take the shot there. It's just too risky. Christian McCaffrey makes sense if you want to roll the dice on the injury bug, but outside of that, I'm really not looking at any running backs up until we see Jonathan Taylor about halfway down the second round of the draft, just because he's falling so much due to the contract controversy.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think looking at the last pod we were on today, we've seen running backs kind of like you mentioned, they're taking it a round later. And it actually might work for your hero RB strategy, where you could still potentially take 2 elite wide receivers and have a running back in that third round that could still give you that top tier production. You mentioned Ramondre Stevenson. He was a beast last year. If he can continue to hold that workload, he's going to be elite. And you have that one elite running back. Travis Etienne, if he can take the next step in his progression, he has a chance to do very well. Najee Harris, there's some, Joe Mixon, who has the backfield to himself. There's a couple guys in that third round that you could still make this strategy work instead of having to take the top 2 guys. That's like the preferred method, because those guys are going to give you elite options. But in this sense, you could take 2 wide receivers or take Kelsey and a wide receiver and get still an elite RB and call it hero RB, and then eventually work your way to getting more wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, whatever you want down the road, and then get back to taking RBs. That's an approach I might be considering taking in one of my leagues or 2, depending on where I fall in the draft. But, it's a good year to go these 2 first strategies for the running backs, because there's a lot of good talent in the later rounds. So, yeah,
Joe Mixon is actually going 42nd right now in NFL.com rankings for those drafts. That's a massive, massive value.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Imagine like Travis Kelce, Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, and then getting Joe Mixon.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Dude, it's nuts. But I mean, Chris Olave, you can still do that, right? Because Chris Olave's fallen to 38 on ESPN.
Yeah.
So Joe Mixon's going 25, but Chris Olave's fallen all the way down to 38. So there are ways. It depends on where you're at,
right? Of course.
What your platform you're using, your league mates. Of course, you need to know which guys they like. But there are ways to make hero RB work, even if you have to start 2 running backs, just because those guys carry the weight, and then you can take a bunch of shots on guys later. If I'm doing hero RB, I'm not taking another running back until probably the 12th round. But then every pick after that, well, depending on how deep your bench is.
Right, of course. Yeah, of course.
But, assuming you're doing like a 16-round draft, every last pick that I'm taking from like the 12th to the 16th is running backs, because I'm just taking shots on guys who could be taking up backup roles. Maybe you'll end up with like the Latavius Murray, or whatever the case is, where he can end up going down and winning you an entire league just based on the volume he's going to receive, because that's what type of backup he is.
No, of course. And again, you just like the zero RB, you have to know the backups. You get a little cushion because you take an elite RB early, but you need to know the backups, and that's really important to know the backups and be active, obviously very active on waiver wire. So, all right, let's flip the gear here with the RBs and go RB heavy, zero wide receiver early kind of situation here. And that's usually what happens when you're taking RBs early. You're missing out on these elite wide receivers. Chase, do you like this strategy going this direction here?
It really depends on what app you're on. Like this is more app dependent than anything. Like I'm not doing this on Sleeper because all the good wide receivers are gone. There's nobody that sneaks through. Like right now, I'm looking at Rashad Bateman on ESPN. He's number 233rd ranked wide receiver on ESPN. I mean, 233rd ranked player. I'm sorry, ranked player. But still, either way, that's terrible. Like, that's absolutely absurd. That's a 20th round pick, right? So, like, I'll take Rashad Bateman, the starting, either wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2, most likely for the Baltimore Ravens. Jamison Williams is another guy who's going to miss 6 games, but on ESPN, he's 185. So, there are certain players. God, ESPN has Devin and Chain. I just saw that. That's ridiculous. 199.
Ooh, that's late.
So, anyways, yeah, like if you're playing on certain platforms, I'm going to look for certain platforms to give you positional advantages. And when it comes to zero wide receiver, I'll do it on ESPN just because they trash the wide receivers so much and they push up the running backs like crazy amounts. I don't mind taking the guys like that early on and going heavy running back in ESPN leagues.
I respect it. I think in a total situation for me, I just prefer not to go this strategy. I know people do enjoy going this because they value the running back position as, there's a big cutoff from the top guy to like the guy that's 30 down to 35 compared to maybe the wide receivers a little bit more together with the mean. But I mean, if you go in this direction, you're getting guys, you're taking like the McCaffrey, Barkley, Robinson, and getting like a Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, Ramondre Stevenson, and then maybe coming around and getting Miles Sanders, J.K. Dobbins, Damian Pierce situation, which is good. You're going to have a strong core at running back, which you could then use potentially to maybe trade with somebody. And I think if you're going that direction, that's the idea you're going to eventually try to trade one of these guys and get a good return out of it. That's the only way I can really see it really working personally. I like having the top end wide receivers. We saw last year that most of the top wide receivers that were drafted early on finished as a really good wide receiver. And if you're looking at the wide receivers and you're going down the list and you're waiting until, the 40s, I mean, you're looking at Treylon Burks, Gabe Davis, Kadarius Toney, Cortland Sutton, Odell, Elijah Moore. Like these guys are okay, but it's going to be very hard for them to all get our wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 potential unless an injury occurs in their offense there, which is possible. But those guys just don't scream, I want to take my wide receiver 2 with one of these guys, because then you're just killing yourself at the end of the day here. Opportunity matters, and I feel like running backs, people can get more opportunity more times than not than at wide receiver. I feel like the way the NFL is working nowadays, the passing offense is focusing on a couple players. It's not spreading the ball around as often, and you have a better shot at getting a guy who could end up being an RB1 for a team than a guy who ends up coming and finishes as a wide receiver 1 that you're taking in the later rounds. So with this strategy, it's decent. People do it. Again, the shortfall is that you need to make sure you hit it wide receiver, because it's not every day you're going to get a waiver wire wide receiver that comes up and finishes as RB1. I mean, I don't know about you, Chase. I don't know if I could think of a time recently that a wide receiver too often, or you get in the double digits and finishes as a wide receiver 1.
It's pretty rare. It's pretty rare.
It's rare.
Typically, like there's season-ending wide receivers that do it, but you can find them on the waiver wire at the end of the season. Right. Like where a quarterback comes in who's had a relationship with another wide receiver, whatever the case is. But I mean, ESPN, just to give you an example real quick, I'm going through this, and these are the players that are ranked ahead of Donovan Peoples-Jones on ESPN, which is why I would be okay going zero wide receiver on ESPN. It's because these players will never get taken. We have ranked ahead of Donovan Peoples-Jones, which you might like Donovan Peoples-Jones, you might not. But these are the players ranked ahead. Antonio Brown, Quez Watkins, Calvin Austin, Justin Watson, Ray McLeod, Trenton Irwin, Benjamin Victor, that's a good one, River Kraft,
yeah. Wow.
I mean, like
ESPN
Robbie Chosen, So like you can find I mean these players. So Khalil Shakur, not ranked. Joshua Palmer, which if there's an injury, that's massive upgrade. That's a league winner right there. If you get him on your waivers later, so I'm okay going 0 wide receiver to an extent. Maybe not 0 wide receiver, but like
hero wide receiver.
yeah. Especially with ESPN, I think ESPN is 2 and 2. I think that's how their starting lineups are. It's 2 running back, 2
2
wide
and 2,
receivers.
yeah.
So I'm cool with that.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's definitely okay. Like I said, if you look at last year's top 20 receivers, I mean, all of them were probably drafted within the first 10 rounds, and more than half or 75% of them were probably drafted in the first 6 rounds. So, I mean, the likelihood you're going to find a elite wide receiver late in drafts is definitely not as high overall. I mean, you're better off. You're probably going to, if anything, you're going to get a stretch of games of elite production rather than an entire season's worth of production from a guy you're getting in the later rounds. So it's a solid strategy. Again, not for me personally, but yeah. All right, let's get over to the next one. This one's a little more common. This might be for those who maybe don't have a lot of fantasy leagues or maybe are in just one, but best player available. Pretty self-explanatory. You take the best player available based on your need to some extent. Obviously, you're not going to just take a quarterback right after you took a quarterback. So don't make that mistake, or take a tight end right after you make a tight end. But obviously, you take the best player available based on the need you have at the time. And this strategy is effective. It's really hard to go wrong because you're just taking the best available player. Chase, I mean, I'm pretty sure this is kind of a scenario where you're a newbie to fantasy, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, well, best player available, you have to have an opinion, right? You can't be completely new to it. But smaller leagues, we were talking about it before the show. But a buddy of mine reached out and he gave me the scenario where it's start 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 2 wide receiver, and 1 tight end, and 1 flex. Yeah.
It's a 6-person starting lineup, I think you said.
Yeah, it was like 6 people on the starting lineup. It just made no sense to like have a focus on a strategy because it's all based on, which players you like. Like you might as well just grab the best one that's available. When it's all said and done, you're going to have wide receivers that give you starting value that are going to end up on the waiver wire for sure. Running backs, you're going to have somebody, minimum 1 person, if not multiple, that end up that are ranked inside the top 40 that will end up on the waiver wire. You'll have plenty of opportunities. This is just more of like a have fun type strategy. Go get your guy, man. Charity leagues, go get your guy. Like, leagues that you're playing with your buddies where you're just talking shit, you're not even paying. Go get your guy. It's best player available for a reason, but you also have to be somewhat flexible in terms of your strategy if you end up getting like 4 wide receivers to start it out,
Right. No, definitely. You have to think a little logically, just see what you have on your team and what direction you really want to go. I mean, yeah, you can get the players you like in a best available situation, but also know what your team has got to do still overall in the long run. Just don't start with 5 wide receivers and say, oh, well, these were the best players, Well, you have to adjust it slightly, but stick to your best available kind of situation. So again, I like my hero RB. That's the best play I can go about it. So
Yep.
All right, let's talk about some tight ends because the tight ends are an interesting situation here between late tight end, early tight end. Now, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. Early tight end, there's a couple guys at the top, and then everyone else is pretty much just in between. But at that point, should you just go into the very end of your draft if everyone is basically the same? Chase, how do you prefer? Obviously, do you prefer to just take your tight end early, or do you just say, I'm just going to wait and find out who I take later?
This is a build type strategy or a value based strategy for me. So either let's say I'm sitting there at 108 and Travis Kelce's fell to me at 108 because he's going at like 106 on average. I have no problem taking Kelce. Am I going to reach for him at 104? Probably not. Not unless I'm aiming for like a Patrick Mahomes stack in best ball, and I've already done 280 drafts at this point. So I'm just trying to diversify my lineups. In terms of like stacks. Like, let's just say that I have 2 quarterback and I drafted Justin Jefferson and I'm lining up Kirk Cousins in my crosshair. And then I have Hawkinson on the board. And I'm like, yeah, might as well complete my Minnesota stack. Let's do this. It's more based off of what my team already looks like in terms of stacking, a correlation, especially for late season correlation. For example, if I'm building a team and I have like Tua, Jalen Waddle, and Tyreek Hill, Mark Andrews on the board, I'll take Mark Andrews all day, just based off of the correlation for week 17 that you get. So for me, it's just more about correlating my builds, correlating my stacks, and values if they fall to me.
And that's a great way to put it. Like I said, with me, it really just obviously will depend on where your draft is, where you're located in the draft, obviously. Obviously, taking Travis Kelce early in round, or taking Travis Kelce in the back half of round 1 makes a ton of sense. And then at that point, I'm taking this tight end early, and that's going to change my strategy completely. That's the one thing with this tight end, early, late. If you plan on taking a tight end early, it's going to change everything you do the rest of the draft. Even if you take like Mark Andrews in round 2 or round 3, it's going to change your draft a little bit because now you're missing a position somewhere else, whether it was at elite running back, elite wide receiver. Now you have the elite tight end, and now it's going to change the way you do things. I like it. Last year, a lot of my leagues, I obviously took Kelce earlier in round 2 a lot, and it worked out for me. Mark Andrews didn't work out as well as I wanted him to do, but again, he still provided with a solid production in the first half of last season. So, you're taking these guys that have that positional advantage. Late round tight ends. I mean, at that point, if I'm not getting a tight end with the top 7 tight ends, I'm going to wait until the later rounds. And there definitely are some good options you can wait in the later rounds for. Again, you're banking for upside taking a tight end late. You're not going to want a tight end that's like, he could be the second option, but he's like not that good. Like, trying to think of a situation like the Colts tight ends a couple of years ago, Jack Doyle. He was potentially the second option on the team, but he wasn't anything special. It wasn't anything great. And you want to go out for guys that give you that upside, like the Sam Laporters, the Dalton Kincaids of the world, some guys that are interesting if they get that role in their offense. Like if Mike Gesicki gets the starting tight end role, intriguing, because he's a pass catching tight end. He has that upside and ability to his game there. Things like that. What's up?
I'm not even drafting tight ends at that point. Like if it's falling to me that far, I'm just streaming tight ends. I'm gonna draft a guy up until week 1 right before I have to start, and then I'm gonna drop a dude and play the best tight end that I think streaming has available, right? Because like drafting Mike Gesicki at tight end 23. I mean, if we're talking redraft, nobody's going to have him on his roster, right? Like nobody in their right mind should have Mike Gesicki on your roster as you approach week 1, regardless of his starting position, because you still have Hunter Henry. You still have a bunch of questions. We don't know how the offense is going to operate. We don't know what their snap percentage is going to be. Like trying to assume that by drafting a guy and wasting a pick. Like you can end up drafting somebody's handcuff. And if you draft somebody's handcuff and that player gets hurt, the starter gets hurt, well, all of a sudden now you have the most valuable piece in terms of improved value from a 14th round pick or 16th round pick into what would be a 5th round pick, right? Like if
you still got to draft a tight end though. You still got to get one on your team 11.
By week one.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair to say. Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. Absolutely.
And I'd much rather stream because like when we look at tight end finishes, right? So all right, let's bring up Cole Kmet real quick. Cole Kmet finished last year as tight end 8. How many performances do you think he had over 10 points?
I believe it was 3 or 4.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're close. Okay. Oh, that includes week 18. So
and he scored a touchdown 18. In all those weeks.
Yeah. So he actually had 4 performances from weeks 1 through 17 where he was startable, right? Like you don't want to roll out this is a full point PPR league. You don't want to roll out a tight end that's going to give you 5.7 points. Like, that it doesn't do anything for you. So waiting to see how things shake out for me is far more crucial to your overall development, and having a backup running back that could take the starter's job or could take over for a starter because their player gets hurt is so much more critical than drafting a guy late. Like, I don't want to spend a draft pick. I don't want to spend a 14th round draft pick on a tight end. I just don't want to do it because the likelihood that he hits in week 1 is very low. You might as well play whatever tight end is up against the Cardinals or whatever tight end is up against the Seahawks, because those two teams guarantee you tight end points almost every single week. I'll play the matchups.
I respect it. I like it. I do like it. Just know ESPN, you cannot do that. You have to take the position.
Well, then I'm dropping him and I'm picking up somebody on free agent.
Just so you know, you have to draft a tight end. I believe Sleeper, they don't require to have all your positions filled out. I think you can just do whatever you want there. But with ESPN, I know for sure that you have to draft a tight end. So just keep that in mind. But you're right, Chase. You're absolutely right. You're definitely right.
I'm not taking either. If I'm drafting in the last round, I'm not going to take either the Arizona or the Seahawks one because I don't want anybody to know my secret. I'm going to take the guy that I know nobody else will ever want in a million years with my last pick of the draft, and then I'm going to drop him and I'm going to go pick up a running back.
I like it. Up
until week 1, and once we go to week 1, as we're going in Saturday before the games, I'll go pick up the guy who's playing the Arizona Cardinals. I don't even know who they play week 1, to be honest. Oh wait. Oh, it's Washington. They play Washington. Pick up Logan Thomas.
Yeah, go pick up Logan Thomas. I mean, I'm still picking up Sam Laporta late in drafts. I don't care. The Chiefs I said I think on our tight end podcast that he's going to be a top 12 tight end that week. He's going to be a top 12 tight end.
Okay.
I feel it. I feel it coming. I'm excited for it. So, all right. So the tight end position, it doesn't take a lot. Touchdown. If you get a touchdown and we win, boom. So I marked it in my book. So. All right, let's get over to quarterbacks. Let's look at quarterbacks between taking QBs early, taking QBs late. Now, the narrative for a long time, I think, take the quarterback late because it just doesn't matter at that point. Why take a quarterback early? There's so many other positions out there. But, last year, if you took a quarterback early, you did pretty well all season. You took Patrick Mahomes, you took Josh Allen, you took Joe Burrow, took some of these guys early, Jalen Hurts. I don't know. I think Jalen Hurts was still going kind of in the middle. Yeah. But you took some of these guys early. Didn't hurt you. You had good production for them all season long. And if you look at some of the guys at the end, there weren't too many quarterbacks that kind of stepped up. I mean, Geno Smith was a nice in situation, obviously, but very inconsistent, I feel like, all season. Tua had moments, but he got hurt. I'm trying to think who else was there early. I think maybe Trevor Lawrence might have been taken late last year. He had actually a pretty good season. So where do you stand with quarterbacks here, Chase, in terms of strategy? Do you prefer taking them early? Do you prefer taking them late?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for me, it's really like no question in terms of what I'm doing here, and it's very similar to the tight ends, right? Like if I don't have a guy that follows me in ADP in terms of value, then I'm taking a guy late or not at all. I'll stream quarterbacks throughout the first 2 weeks. Like you brought up, there were some ones that fell. Jared Goff is one you didn't bring up. He's a guy that could have won you fantasy leagues. Unfortunately, I was high on Jared Carr last year. That didn't necessarily happen, so we can scratch that one from the books. Russell Wilson is a guy this year that could fall. Kirk Cousins always finishes inside the top 12, and yet he's still going in round 10 right now in redraft leagues. And he has a week 13 bye, so you don't have to worry about bye weeks early on in the season. You can ride him for as long as you want, as long as the matchup favors it. Tua's going a couple picks before him, and I love Tua this year. It's just if I told you get Patrick Mahomes, right? Or you get the old version of Russell Wilson, there's not that much of a gap in production between the old Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes, and now you're talking about a 10-round difference. So, or I'm sorry, it's a 10-round difference. So if we take let's see, players that have, where was I? Players that have ADP. All right, so sorry, I got to rewind. Let's go ahead and talk about this. Would you rather have AJ Brown, okay, who's right there? They're touching ADPs. They're touching ADPs for single quarterback leagues.
Ugh.
Or how far down do I have to go to find Russell Wilson? I'm just going to do control find real quick. Sorry, this is great radio, guys.
That's okay. Take your time, man. Take your time.
Okay, let's see. A.J. Brown, right, who we just talked about, and Russell Wilson, or Patrick Mahomes and Alan Lazard.
Ugh.
Alan
Yeah.
Lazard and Patrick Mahomes, or A.J. Brown and Russell Wilson, or A.J. Brown and Jared Goff.
Yeah, give me AJ Brown and Jared Goff.
Yeah, or Russell Wilson. I mean, or
I
Patrick
do prefer
Mahomes
that.
and I'll give you Adam Thielen, Alan Lazard.
Would you take Sky Moore and Patrick Mahomes? Is Sky Moore going in that range? I feel like he is.
Sky Moore's later. Yeah, having a stack makes a little bit more sense.
It's not too often you can get a stack that different though. We'll talk about stacks in a few minutes, but it's very rare to get a stack like that.
Yeah, maybe, but I still don't love that stack because it could be Kadarius Toney, it could be just Travis Kelce, it could be spread around. Sky Moore sucked last year, right?
He did.
Sure, they invested the draft capital, but he wasn't good. And typically, there's not a very big track record for rookie wide receivers that put up his production that perform later on. This whole third-year breakout is a complete myth that we created for players that we liked because not everybody had access to the data back 10 years ago. And so we've continuously played off this for an additional 5 years. When everybody else is screaming that doesn't exist, they're listening to the big-time companies that want to try and find the player that they like that's going to break out. That's not the case. Even if I go up, we're going to have to go Quentin Johnson, Zay Flowers, and I'm going up a full round right now.
I don't hate those guys, honestly. But I mean, I do prefer I would
A.J.
rather
Brown,
get the
yeah.
AJ Brown and get the Jared Goff or Russell Wilson in that sense there. And
Yeah,
based on where some of these quarterbacks are going early, I feel like if one of the top three falls to me in round 4, I wouldn't have a problem taking them. They might not fall there, and it really depends on your league, and you have to know your league. If some of these quarterbacks isn't taken high and they fall to that 4 range, 5 range, I wouldn't mind taking a shot on them. That's my one checkpoint when it comes to quarterbacks.
Bro,
If one of those guys falls, what?
I came back, right? Because I'm sitting there thinking in my mind, oh, yeah, you're probably right about that. ESPN probably has Patrick Mahomes at player 25, right? And A.J. Brown is probably at player 8. A.J. Brown's at 18. Patrick Mahomes is at 12 right now at ADP.
Oh, my God.
What? What? That's bizarre.
Well, they're obviously not going to fall there. But if you know your league well enough, they might be there in round 4. And if not, round 10 is the next time I look at quarterback, to be honest. Round 9, round 10, because I like the Kirk Cousins. I like the Tua Tagovailoa types. I like Deshaun Watson because he seems to be falling down in that range there. And at that point, you have most of your starting lineup. And if you don't choose to take a quarterback then, I'm waiting. I'm taking somebody at the end and
You're
playing
streaming
the waiver wire at that point. Yeah, at that point, I'm streaming. If I have to take a quarterback, I will. But I'm streaming the rest of this because I think you can find a quarterback very easily week in and week out to perform at a decent top 15 quarterback most weeks, which is great.
What's interesting? I said Logan Thomas, right? And this is kind of a joke, but Sam Howell actually becomes interesting as a streaming guy up against the Arizona Cardinals with Eric Bieniemy. They don't know what to expect. I don't know what to expect, and I've been a Commanders fan my whole life. I have no idea what this offense is going to look like. Sam Howell could end up running for 150 yards and throw for another 250. Which 250 isn't great, but in terms of the efficiency levels, because of how big of a mess this Arizona defense is, man, that's sexy.
I'm all aboard the Howell train. I'm hoping he succeeds. I love Sam Howell.
I mean, I think he's going to be okay. I don't think he's going to be starting by 2023. I mean, 2024.
I hope that's not true, but we'll see. Obviously, what other ones do I have here, guys? Value-based drafting. Chase, tell us about value-based drafting.
So value-based drafting is built off of trying to create variance in lineups. This is where you have pretty much when you're a degenerate like myself, and you don't realize you're a degenerate yet because you think you're in 10 leagues, and then all of a sudden you're in 28 after blinking because some jackass decides to start this different league that you never played in before, like this team where I'm not even going to go into all the different leagues that you've created, Coach Steve. All right, I'm mad at you for doing it all, but I love it, man. It's a lot of fun. I appreciate you for setting up those different leagues. But value-based drafting is essentially taking a guy at value, not because you think that he's a great player, because you think he's going to put up a lot of fantasy points, but because the combination of the players that you already have in combination, well, yeah, I said in combination, the players that you already have with the player that you could get that can't exist in any of the rest of your lineups because one player falls so far to you. Meanwhile, the reason that he falls could be based off of bad news, like temporary bad news or skepticism, or maybe your league just doesn't like him. For example, like the chance of you getting, let's just say AJ Brown in a sleeper league at pick 20 doesn't exist, right? But if he falls to you, doesn't matter if you like him or not. Like, you have to take that chance with him because the chance that somebody else has the combination of, let's just say, if you're drafting to pick 20, that would mean that you're getting like Jamar Chase or Cooper Kupp and AJ Brown. Like, that combination doesn't exist. So these are typically drafts where they're bigger fields, best ball, charity leagues, charity tournaments, where it ends up going into a much bigger field than just the initial 12-team field that it starts with.
Right. And you could think of players like Breece Hall this year,
Yeah,
tremendous talent, but the injury concerned. You think of Josh Jacobs, tremendous talent, contract issues. Like, at what point do you take them? And that's the whole point of the value-based drafting. If they don't go in round 2 what they should, but you're getting them at the back of round 3, it's like, well, there's issues, there's risk, but I'm getting a guy who has 2-round potential higher 2 rounds later. So,
Josh Jacobs might be a borderline first-round pick if this contract dispute did not exist. If he signed a 2-year contract with like a fake 3rd year added on a 3-year contract, Josh Jacobs would be a borderline first-round pick right now. And he's going to like pick 30?
Yeah, ADP has him at 22.
Okay, yeah. I think that's best ball has him closer to like round 30. But
Makes
yeah,
sense.
Either way, Josh Jacobs is going way too late in terms of like where you could have him versus where he should be.
Right, exactly, definitely. Again, there's going to be players every year like that, and those are just some of the names of them, obviously, that kind of fit that kind of strategy. What about stacks? I know we mentioned stacks already. I don't know if you like to do stacks. If there's a stack out there you like this year.
Yeah, I don't understand why people don't like stacks. Do you know what? Yeah, it doesn't really make any sense. It's like, okay, if a quarterback does well, then it's likely that his wide receiver is going to do well. And if wide receiver does well, most of the time his quarterback's going to be at least startable, right? Maybe not the best quarterback on the slate, but at least startable.
Agreed.
So, it's not like you have a situation where, okay, it happens, right? Like we had Josh Allen throw 4 touchdowns to Gabriel Davis last year. Was that last year up against the Steelers? Or whatever the total was. But typically, if you have a primary receiver in an offense like a Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen, if Josh Allen goes off, most likely Stephon Diggs is also going to go off. It's pretty rare that they both don't do it simultaneously. So for you to say, I think a quarterback is going to do well, but I don't want his primary wide receiver throughout the whole season, doesn't really make much sense. Meanwhile, you get guys like, I don't know, Michael Gallup, right? Who Michael Gallup has seen his draft stock plummet right to the bottoms of the earth. You're getting them in super late rounds at this point, especially in redraft leagues and amateur leagues who have forgotten how good he can be just because of 2 years of battling injuries. Is he going to come back and be what he was? Probably not. But can he come back and start for you for 6 weeks of the season, 4 weeks of the season? Yeah, he could absolutely do that. So backdoor stacking is something that I absolutely embrace. We talked about Sky Moore and Patrick Mahomes. That's a backdoor stack, right? Where you go later on in the draft. Meanwhile, I don't understand if you have an opportunity to put 2 guys together without reaching too far. Like don't go reach around ahead to, don't go reach around. Don't go reach a complete round ahead to, go take a stack because it's counterproductive when you could hope that he could fall to you and you could get a value. I don't see why people dislike stacking.
Yeah, I mean, I do like it. I enjoy it, and I try to do it off of my wide receiver one, and I try to. I mean, it might get in the way of my strategy in a general sense, but like when I'm looking, if I find a wide receiver I like early on in the rounds, I try to get that quarterback if I can. If it makes sense for me to do so, I go that direction. If I get Justin Jefferson, I might then consider waiting and just take Kirk Cousins at that point because I know I don't need to take a quarterback that quickly, and I know Kirk Cousins will be there. Same like a couple other guys. Like it's less likely I do like an AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts because it means I'm taking both those guys kind of early. I'd have taken back-to-back rounds. Again, you can do that absolutely. I mean, if you get the Kelsey Mahomes stack somehow, you're golden. But again, you're taking him a little earlier than you want to some of these other tight quarterbacks where your elite number one guy is attached to a guy in the later drafts that's decent. You're going to get 12 points every single week and also have more elite options there. I like to do that, prefer than taking two elite players like the Mahomes, Kelsey. You can, and it works. Obviously, it's elite. But in the same sense, I feel like you're missing out on situations a little bit like that. Maybe Allen and Diggs, Brown and Hurts. Like you could take those stacks and they're going to work. The stack work, but you're losing out on potential player options in those rounds there where you could take a top tier wide receiver early or a tight end and then stack them with a quarterback that a little bit later that maybe isn't the top tier, but then a couple tiers down. So that's kind of how I like to do my stacks. What about, let's see, one last one here. How do you feel about handcuffing players? Like, do you like handcuffing your RBs? Is there maybe like I know it doesn't happen as much in wide receivers, but if you know the wide receiver is an injury prone guy, think this year, like Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, do you go and take that 9th, 10th round pick on a Quentin Johnson this year? Do you like doing those kind of strategies with handcuffs?
Well, I don't think wide receivers necessarily stack the same way that running backs do.
No, they don't. I'm
sorry, handcuff.
Yeah, they don't, but.
Because targets are earned, right? Targets aren't given. So if you have a wide receiver that's out there, just because a wide receiver is hurt doesn't mean that the wide receiver is taking his place is actually going to get those targets. In fact, the player that gets the most increase in targets outside of the players combined that end up taking that player's spot is actually the running back position. The running back sees the highest increase in targets per play or whatever it is. So I like grabbing and handcuffing other players' running backs. That's what I like handcuffing.
There you go.
I want to handcuff every other player's out there's backup running back because I want to eliminate them. I want to eliminate the owner of Christian McCaffrey by taking Elijah Mitchell every time. Every time. I'm taking Elijah Mitchell in almost every single draft because I want to play up against 10 other people in my league, not 11.
And then I will take Jordan Mason in the 16th round and call it a day.
Okay, yeah, you can do that because honestly, Elijah Mitchell,
he gets hurt.
I'm halfway kidding about the Elijah Mitchell, right? I'm more
I know, but I get what you're saying though.
like AJ Dillon, a player that has independent value, right? I'm taking him. Back before Antonio Gibson got all the hype, I was taking him. Everywhere that I possibly could.
Yeah, I don't like handcuffing my elite running backs that often.
I don't like handcuffing any running backs.
I feel like it's a waste almost because you're just holding on, hoping for an injury. Like, why do you want to hope that your running back gets hurt?
You're betting against yourself.
Yeah.
You're betting against yourself, and then you're clogging your roster by saying, "Oh, my bet was actually right. Like I bet correctly, right? Like." Meanwhile, you're punishing yourself for betting correctly if you have somebody on your roster. That's your handcuff for the running back.
Right.
Meanwhile, if you bet against yourself, you're saying, I bet incorrectly, so I'm going to reward myself for betting incorrectly. It just, neither way, it's like, why? Like, why would you do that?
Don't take the player to begin with and take the backup.
Yeah.
Like last year with Alexander Madison. Everyone, I'm sure, took Madison. If you had a lot of people, I'm sure, took Dalvin Cook with Madison. What did that Madison do last year? Absolutely nothing.
I'll tell you what he did for your fantasy league. He got dropped on the waivers by like week 12 because nobody believed him. And then somebody picked him up when he played like the Seahawks or the Lions because that's the only teams he ever produces against.
That's true.
And he went off. 69% of his startable weeks in his career, weeks where he put up double-digit fantasy points, were against the Lions or the Seahawks. 69%. Of his startable weeks.
All bottom five run defenses.
Yes, it's sad. Alexander Madison, I'm going to let you have your light with Alexander Madison, but I'm just going to leave it at that.
I get it. There's a lot riding against him. That's why people are so down on him. I get it. But we're not here to talk about Madison all day. But again, like I said, handcuffs, it's just like handcuff someone else. Like imagine you Imagine you handcuff someone else's running back, then you have a running back to trade to that owner for something that you might need.
No,
so
I
like
would,
that's
I
the
would
best way to
trade
do
him. I wouldn't just do that. I would trade him to another owner who needs him.
That works too, yes.
Just so I can eliminate one team completely from contention, because now they can't get a running back. They're screwed, right? If their starter goes out. So I'm trading him to another team that might need it, not as badly, right? So it actually is less of a need filler for that team, and then I get a player back. Sure, does it make that other team a little bit more competitive? Yeah, but does it improve their team as much as it would improve the other person's team? Hell no. So I'm going to trade him to the other team for a competitive advantage and get a player back that I need much more than what he needs, that backup level running back. Because honestly, backup level running backs don't really produce that much more anyways. Like, you know how many people traded me for Caleb Huntley last year because I had Caleb Huntley?
Oh, God.
And guess what Caleb Huntley did? Nothing.
Oh, God. There's a lot of running backs that did that last year. I feel like a lot of people went out, dominated, picking up running backs, and they did nothing. Half of them last year did nothing.
And it was great because I got like Christian Watson before his breakout in so many redraft leagues last year, right?
Love that.
Like I capitalized. I'm pretty sure Caleb Huntley went for Christian Watson before he broke out last year. Like in a straight up trade. Well, people need running backs. They need them because they always get hurt. Like that's why the hero running back works and not heavily invest in running back, is because typically both those running backs, if not just one of them, will end up getting hurt by halfway through the season. So you waste your pick anyways.
Agreed. Oh, all right. Well, I think we're going to wrap things up here for the night. We did a nice hour-long show, Chase. I liked it. A lot of good conversating here about different kinds of draft strategies. Do you have a good time tonight?
Dude, always, man. Always, of course.
Love to hear that. I love it. Like I said, guys, we went over a bunch of different strategies. Well, it's zero RB, hero RB, heavy RB, zero wide receivers. We did some early and late tight ends, some early and late quarterbacks, best players, stacks, handcuffs. It's a lot of different things you could do with your draft strategies. It just depends on which one you like the best, and you need to know the background, how it works. And hopefully this episode gave you guys some insight on how that happens and what plays you could help target you for this coming season. Chase, of course, man, I love having you on as always. Is there anything you want to mention before we get going?
Dude, I'm so excited for Canton, man. Are you going?
I'm not going to Canton, man.
What?
I'm sorry. I'm not. I know. I promise I will be there next year. 100% I'm going next year.
Man.
Didn't fit in my cards this year, but next year I am going no matter what. Don't care.
Sure.
I said that the last few years, but next year for sure. 2024 is, I'm going to meet all the people I've been chatting up with the last 5 years, and it's going to be glorious. But again, guys, I appreciate you for tuning in as always. I appreciate you guys listening to a second episode, whether it's now or whether it's afterwards on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever. We do appreciate it. We're just trying to help you guys win some championships. Again, this month's going to be filled with some fun episodes. We're really going to break down these 2023 drafts into detail, and I really hope you guys enjoy it. We'll be back next Monday and Tuesday next week, and then we'll be back for another double feature the following Monday. And then before you know it, it's going to be the season, guys. So thank you guys all for listening. Tune in until next time, guys, and have a good one.
Back to back is not far-fetched. We got a couple of Clark Kents. I've been